They say a wedding is the happiest day of a woman's life. But for me, it's the day I finally stop being a victim and start being a ghost. The atmosphere, a house of cold stone. The St. Jude's Cathedral didn't feel like a place of God today. It felt like a gilded cage. Outside, the sky over the city had turned a bruised, electric purple, pouring down a torrential rain that drummed against the stained glass windows like 1,000 frantic heartbeats. Inside, the air was suffocating, thick with the cloying scent of white lilies and the expensive, musky cologne of men who carried silencers in their breast pockets. The pews were packed. On the left sat the remnants of the old regime, broken men with scarred knuckles, loyal to a dead Don. On the right sat the new power, Adrian's men. There they wore tailored charcoal suits and looked at the world with the bored, predatory gaze of sharks in a tank. In the center of this den of lions stood Bonnie. She looked ethereal, a ghost wrapped in vintage ivory lace. Her veil was a masterpiece of silk, but behind it, her breathing was shallow, rhythmic, and dangerously calm. Every step she had taken down the aisle felt like a march toward her own execution. Beside her stood Adrian, the man who had orchestrated the accident that claimed her father's life 3 years ago. He stood tall, radiating the smug arrogance of a man who had finally won the ultimate prize. The Volkov bloodline. The altar, a vow of silence. The priest began the rite, his voice echoing hollowly against the vaulted ceiling. Bonnie wasn't listening. Her mind was a whirlwind of memories. The smell of cigar smoke in her father's office, the sound of a gunshot in the dark, and the face of the man she had lost that same night, Elijah. "Do you, Adrian Moretti, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" The priest droned. "I do," Adrian replied, his voice a smooth, terrifying purr. He turned slightly toward Bonnie, his hand reaching out to lift her veil. His fingers were cold, smelling of aged scotch and old blood. As he pulled the silk back, he leaned in, his eyes locking onto hers with a dark, possessive triumph. "Smile, Bonnie," he whispered, so low only she could hear. "Today, you become a queen, and tomorrow, I burn the last of your father's records. You're mine now, body, soul, and empire." Bonnie felt a shiver of revulsion crawl up her spine, and she looked at the heavy gold band in his hand, a ring that felt more like a handcuff. "And do you, Bonnie Volkov, take this man?" The breaking point, the "I don't." The priest never finished the sentence. The moment Adrian tried to slide the ring onto her finger, Bonnie didn't just pull away. She snapped her hand back as if scorched by fire. The bouquet of dark red roses she had been clutching, roses the color of dried blood, hit the marble floor with a heavy thud, petals scattering like shrapnel. "I cannot say 'I do' to a man who sits on a stolen throne," Bonnie said. Her voice wasn't a scream. It was a cold, sharp blade that cut through the silence of the cathedral. The guests froze. The rhythmic ticking of 100 expensive watches seemed to stop. Adrian's face didn't crumble. It hardened into a mask of pure, lethal rage. "Bonnie," he hissed, his grip tightening painfully around her wrist. "Don't play games you can't win. You have no allies left. You have no home. You have nothing but me." Bonnie didn't flinch. She looked him dead in the eye, a slow, mocking smile spreading across her lips. "You think I'm alone, Adrian? You think I spent 3 years grieving in silence while you played king in my father's house?" She yanked her arm free, the force of it nearly staggering the mafia boss. She turned her back on the altar, facing the shocked crowd. With a slow, deliberate motion, she reached down to the thigh-high slit in her gown, revealing a shimmering gold dagger strapped to her skin. But she didn't reach for the blade. Instead, she raised a trembling, defiant finger toward the massive, arched oak doors at the very back of the hall. "I won't marry a murderer," she shouted, her voice echoing into the rafters. "Especially when the true king is standing by the door, waiting for my signals to tear this empire down." The ghost returns. At that exact second, the heavy doors groaned open. The storm outside roared into the cathedral, bringing with it a gust of freezing air and the smell of wet pavement. A silhouette stood there, framed by a flash of lightning. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and drenched to the bone in a black trench coat. He stepped forward, the heavy thud of his combat boots on the marble floor sounding like a drumbeat of doom. As he moved into the light of the chandeliers, a collective gasp escaped the pews. Men who hadn't felt fear in a decade suddenly paled. It was Elijah. His face, once handsome and smooth, was now a map of jagged, silver scars, one running deep across his brow, another pulling at the corner of his jaw. His electric blue eyes, once filled with warmth for Bonnie, were now two pieces of cold, calculating ice. He was the man Adrian had claimed was dead. The man whose plane had supposedly vanished over the Atlantic. The man who had been Bonnie's shadow, her protector, and her heart. The declaration of war. Elijah didn't shout. He didn't need to. He stopped 10 paces from the altar, ignoring the dozens of guns now being drawn by Adrian's panicked guards. He kept his hands visible, but his gaze never left Adrian's. "You should have made sure the heart stopped beating, Adrian," Elijah said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated in the chests of everyone present. Adrian stood frozen, his hand instinctively reaching for the pistol tucked into his waistband. You're a ghost. You died in that crash. I saw the wreckage." "I crawled out of the wreckage," Elijah replied, taking another step forward. "I crawled through the mud and the blood for 3 years just to be here for this specific moment." Elijah turned his eyes to Bonnie. For a split second, the ice melted, replaced by a raw, agonizing longing. Then, the mask returned. He looked back at Adrian and drew a customized black handgun from his coat, with a speed that made the guards flinch. He didn't fire. He simply aimed it at the ceiling. "The wedding is over," Elijah declared. "The queen is leaving, and anyone who tries to stop her, well, I've been practicing for 3 years. I don't miss anymore." Bonnie stepped off the altar, thus walking toward Elijah without a single backward glance at the man she was supposed to marry. She didn't look like a bride anymore. She looked like a general joining her army. As she reached Elijah, he didn't embrace her. He simply stepped in front of her, a human shield of scarred muscle and iron will. They thought they could bury the past under a white veil, but the past doesn't stay buried. It just waits for the right time to come back and claim what's hers. Part 2. The emotional pull. The scars of exile. The escape. The cathedral had transformed from a holy sanctuary into a chaotic slaughterhouse in seconds. The air was thick with the smell of cordite and the deafening roar of gunfire. Elijah didn't panic. He moved with the lethal, practiced efficiency of a man who had spent 3 years preparing for this specific chaos. He swept Bonnie behind him, his body a wall of iron and scarred muscle. His loyalists, hidden among the wedding staff, opened fire, creating a corridor of lead. Elijah grabbed Bonnie's hand. His grip was calloused and rough, a stark contrast to the soft, pampered hands of the men she had been forced to entertain. They burst through the side doors into the torrential rain, diving into a black SUV that sat idling like a predator in the dark. As the vehicle roared away, Bonnie looked back. The cathedral was a receding silhouette of Gothic stone, swallowed by the storm. For the first 20 minutes, the only sound was the rhythmic slap of the windshield wipers and the heavy, ragged breathing of two people who had just cheated death. The safe house. They arrived at a secluded, derelict Victorian estate, perched on the edge of the northern cliffs. The house groaned under the wind, its windows rattling like old bones. Inside, the air was cold and smelled of damp wood and ancient dust. Elijah moved through the shadows, lighting a single fireplace that cast long, flickering orange shadows across the peeling wallpaper. Bonnie stood in the center of the room. Her white lace wedding gown was ruined. The hem was stained with mud and grease, and the lace was torn. She looked at Elijah, who was standing by the window, his back to her, staring out at the churning black ocean below. 3 years, Elijah, she whispered, her voice cracking for the first time. 3 years of mourning. I watched the news reports. I saw the footage of the plane spiraling into the Atlantic. I sat in that front row at your empty casket. How could you let me live in that hell? How could you let me think you were a ghost? The revelation of the scars. Elijah didn't turn around immediately. His shoulders stayed tense, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. I wasn't a ghost, Bonnie, he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that sounded like it had been dragged over broken glass. A ghost is free. I was a prisoner. He slowly turned and began to unbutton his drenched black trench coat. As the heavy fabric hit the floor with a wet thud, he started on the buttons of his shirt. Bonnie's breath hitched in her throat. As the shirt fell away, the flickering firelight revealed the truth. Elijah's torso was a horrific map of agony. There were jagged silver lightning bolt scars across his chest from electric shocks. Deep, puckered indentations from cigarette burns marked his shoulders. Across his back were the long, raised welts of a whip, scars that had healed poorly in the dark. Adrian didn't kill me in that crash, Elijah said, his eyes finally meeting hers. They were filled with an ancient, weary pain. He pulled me from the wreckage before the fuel tanks blew. He kept me in a black site, a concrete hole 5 stories beneath the city. For 1,000 days, I didn't see the sun. I didn't hear a human voice that wasn't screaming or mocking me. The psychological torture. He stepped closer to her, the heat from the fire radiating off his scarred skin. He didn't just break my bones, Bonnie. He tried to break me mind. He had a screen outside my cell. Every night, he played footage of you. He showed me you crying at the funeral, and he showed me you sitting alone in your father's office. And finally, he showed me the invitations to this wedding. Bonnie reached out, her fingers trembling as she touched the edge of a scar on his forearm. She felt the vibration of his pulse, fast, steady, and alive. He wanted me to watch you marry him, Elijah hissed, his jaw tight. He told me that if I ever tried to escape, He would kill you the moment I stepped into the light. So I stayed. I waited. I endured every strike of the lash because I knew that as long as I was his prisoner, you were safe. I traded my freedom for your life, Bonnie. The reconnection. The weight of his sacrifice crashed over Bonnie like a tidal wave. She realized that while she had been living in a gilded cage of grief, Elijah had been living in a literal dungeon of blood. Her anger vanished and replaced by a raw, desperate need to bridge the 3-year gap between them. She stepped into his space, her hands framing his scarred face. Her thumbs traced the jagged line across his brow. You came back, she breathed. I promised your father I would protect the light, Elijah whispered, leaning his forehead against hers. And you are the only light left in this God-forsaken city. I didn't come back to take the throne, Bonnie. I came back to burn it down so you wouldn't have to sit on it anymore. For a moment, the world outside, the mafia, the betrayal, the hunt, didn't exist. There was only the warmth of the fire and the steady beat of two hearts that had been broken in different ways, but were now, finally, beating in the same room. But as Bonnie leaned her head against his chest, Nair, she felt something hard tucked into the waistband of his trousers. It wasn't a gun. It was an encrypted satellite phone. Elijah, she murmured, pulling back slightly. How did you get the resources to escape? Who helped you? Elijah's expression shifted, a shadow of suspicion crossing his features. I had an inside contact, someone who knew Adrian was getting too greedy, someone who wanted him gone as much as we do. Bonnie looked at the phone, then back at Elijah. The emotional relief was beginning to fade, replaced by the cold reality of their situation. They were out of the cathedral, but they were far from safe. And in the world of the mafia, every favor came with a price tag written in blood. The storm had passed, leaving behind a cold, gray mist that clung to the cliffs like a funeral shroud. Inside the safe house, as the fire had died down to glowing embers, Elijah was hunched over the kitchen table, his scarred hands moving with mechanical precision as he cleaned his Beretta. He looked like a man expecting a war, his eyes constantly darting to the door. Bonnie, however, was not the weeping bride he had rescued. She had shed the ruined lace of her wedding gown, now wearing a simple black, tactical turtleneck and trousers she'd found in a supply crate. She sat at an old mahogany desk in the corner, her face illuminated by the blue light of a high-end military-grade laptop. Her fingers moved across the keys with a speed and confidence that made Elijah pause. You look like you've done that before, Elijah remarked, his voice suspicious. Where did a mafia princess learn to bypass 256-bit encryption? The reveal. Bonnie didn't look up. And while you were in that hole, Elijah, everyone assumed I was just a trophy on Adrian's shelf. They saw a grieving daughter, a fragile girl who spent her days staring out of windows. Adrian let me roam the mansion because he thought I was harmless. He thought my mind had broken when my father died. She hit the enter key, and a series of complex data streams began to scroll across the screen. I wasn't staring out of windows, Elijah. I was counting guards. I was memorizing patrol rotations. And most importantly, I was installing keyloggers on every terminal in Adrian's private study. Elijah walked over, his shadow looming over the desk. He looked at the screen, and his jaw dropped. It wasn't just bank accounts, and it was a full digital map of the city's underground, shipment manifests, police payoff lists, in the private ledgers of the High Council. I didn't call for you at the altar because I needed a savior, Bonnie said, finally turning to look at him. Her eyes were cold, calculating, and brilliantly sharp. I called for you because the moment I said I don't, I triggered a logic bomb in Adrian's network. As of 3 minutes ago, every offshore account linked to the Moretti name has been drained. His legitimate businesses are being flagged for fraud. He is a billionaire who can't even afford a cup of coffee right now. The twist, the ghost in the machine. Elijah stared at her, a mixture of awe and fear in his eyes. He realized the ghost Adrian had been complaining about for the last year, the mysterious hacker who had been intercepting drug shipments and leaking info to the feds, wasn't a rival gang. It was the girl sitting in front of him. You've been dismantling his empire from the inside, Elijah whispered. I've been his silent executioner, Bonnie replied. Adrian didn't just steal my father's throne. He tried to steal my soul. So I decided to take everything he valued first. I didn't need a hero to kill him, Elijah. I needed a king to stand beside me while I took my father's seat back. The hidden trap. But as Bonnie spoke, a red alert began to flash on the corner of the screen. A live feed from a hidden camera inside Adrian's private vault was being broadcast. The vault was empty of money, but Adrian was standing there, looking directly into the camera lens. He wasn't screaming. He was smiling. He held up a black folder, one that Bonnie hadn't been able to digitize. It was a physical file, old and yellowed. He knows we're watching, Elijah said, his hand moving to his holster. Adrian spoke to the camera, his voice distorted but clear through the laptop speakers. Bonnie, you were always the smartest person in the room, but you forgot one thing. Secrets aren't just kept in computers. They are kept in blood. If you want to know the truth about why your father really died, come to the docks. Bring the braying dog Elijah with you. I think it's time he learned about his own inheritance. The screen went black. Bonnie looked at Elijah. The triumph of her digital victory had vanished, replaced by a cold, sinking dread. She had spent 3 years hacking Adrian's world, but there was one secret she hadn't touched. A secret that Adrian was now using as bait. He's leading us into a trap, Elijah warned. I know, Bonnie said, nudged closing the laptop with a snap. But he has the only thing I couldn't steal, the truth. And I'm not leaving the city until I have it. The city docks at 3 a.m. were a maze of rusted shipping containers in the oily, black water of the harbor. The air smelled of salt, rotted fish, and cold exhaust. Elijah moved first, his silhouette blending into the shadows of a massive crane. Bonnie followed, her hand resting on the grip of the gold dagger she had retrieved from the cathedral floor. They reached Warehouse 9. The heavy corrugated door was slightly ajar, a single sliver of yellow light spilling onto the wet concrete. Inside, the space was hollow, echoing with the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of a leaky pipe. The trap. Adrian sat in a high-backed leather chair in the center of the warehouse floor, looking like a king on a throne of scrap metal. He wasn't surrounded by an army. He was alone, holding a single, tattered manila folder. You're late, Adrian said, his voice smooth, despite the fact that Bonnie had just erased his entire net worth. I expected more punctuality from a queen and her loyal dog. Elijah stepped into the light, his gun aimed directly at Adrian's forehead. Give us the file, Adrian. or I'll paint this wall with what's left of your brain." Adrian laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "Oh, Elijah, always so eager to play the hero. But heroes are built on foundations of truth. Yours? Yours is built on a lie so deep it's reached the bone." The revelation. He tossed the folder onto the concrete. It slid to Elijah's boots. Bonnie knelt, her fingers trembling as she flipped it open. Yes, inside were photographs. Not of the plane crash, but of a meeting 20 years ago. There, in the grainy black and white images, was Bonnie's father, the old Don. And standing right next to him, shaking hands with a younger, ambitious Adrian, was Elijah's father. "Your father didn't die defending the Volkov family, Elijah," Adrian sneered, leaning forward. "He was the one who gave me the keys to the vault. He was the one who poisoned the Don's wine that night. He didn't die a hero in a crossfire. I killed him because he got greedy. He wanted half the empire. I only wanted to give him a grave. The blood debt." Elijah froze. The gun in his hand wavered for the first time in 3 years. "You're lying," he whispered. But the documents in Bonnie's hands told a different story. There were wire transfer receipts, each signed in his father's distinctive, elegant handwriting. Bonnie looked up at Elijah, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and realization. The man she loved, the man who had spent 3 years in a torture cell to protect her, was the son of the man who had murdered her parents. "Every scar on your back, Elijah," Adrian continued, twisting the knife, "is a payment for your father's debt. I didn't keep you alive because I feared you. I kept you alive because I enjoyed the irony. The son of the traitor, protecting the daughter of the victim. It's a Shakespearean tragedy, isn't it? The shattered bond." Bonnie stood up slowly, the file fluttering to the ground. She looked at Elijah as if seeing him for the first time. The air between them, once filled with a desperate, protective love, was now thick with the ghosts of their fathers. "Eons, did you know?" Bonnie asked, her voice a hollow shell of itself. "Bonnie, I swear," Elijah began, taking a step toward her. "Stay back," she snapped, her hand flying to her dagger. "Your father killed my mother. He watched my father die, and he shook up the hand of the man who did it. Everything we have, every memory I have of you, it's all tainted by their blood. The final betrayal." Adrian grinned, sensing the kill. "She'll never look at you without seeing a murderer, Elijah. You're not her savior. You're just a reminder of everything she lost." Suddenly, the red dots of a dozen sniper scopes appeared on the floor, dancing across Elijah's chest and Bonnie's white skin. Adrian hadn't come alone. He had used the truth to distract them while his remaining loyalists, mercenaries paid in diamonds he'd hidden away, surrounded the warehouse. "Yeah, now," Adrian said, standing up and drawing his own gold-plated revolver. "Since you've already said I don't to the wedding, Bonnie, how about you say goodbye to the ghost?" Elijah looked at Bonnie, a look of total, agonizing surrender in his eyes. He didn't lift his gun to the snipers. He just looked at her. "I am not my father, Bonnie. But if my life is the price for his sins, then take it." The red laser dots danced across Elijah's chest like blood-red diamonds. Adrian stood with his gold-plated revolver aimed at Bonnie's heart, his finger twitching on the trigger. The warehouse felt like a pressure cooker about to explode. "Kill him, Bonnie," Adrian urged, his voice a venomous whisper. "End the bloodline that ended yours. Do it, and I'll let you walk out of here. We can go back to how it was, Yeah, you can be my silent queen. Bonnie looked at the gold dagger in her hand, then at Elijah. He wasn't fighting back. He stood there, vulnerable and shattered, his eyes reflecting a man who was ready to die, to pay a debt he didn't owe. In that split second, Bonnie realized that Adrian wasn't offering her justice. He was offering her a seat in the same hell he lived in. "You're right, Adrian," Bonnie said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. "Secrets are kept in blood. But my father taught me one thing you never learn. Loyalty isn't inherited. It's earned." The final strike. Instead of lunging at Elijah, Bonnie pivoted with the speed of a viper and threw the gold dagger. It didn't hit Adrian. It struck the main electrical junction box behind him. The warehouse plunged into total, suffocating darkness. "Now," Bonnie screamed. Elijah didn't hesitate. The moment the lights died, he was a ghost in motion. He tackled Bonnie to the ground, just as a hail of sniper fire shattered the glass above them. In the dark, Elijah's 3 years of torture in the black site became his greatest advantage. He had learned to fight by sound and touch alone. Crack, crack, crack. Elijah's Beretta spoke in the darkness. Each muzzle flash illuminated a fragment of the nightmare. Adrian's guards falling, the sparks of ricochets, and Bonnie moving like a shadow through the shipping containers. The confrontation. Bonnie reached Adrian first. He was scrambling toward the back exit, his ego shattered and his power gone. She didn't use a gun. She used the weight of her father's legacy. She tackled him into a stack of wooden crates, pinning him down as the emergency red lights flickered on, embathing the room in a hellish crimson glow. Elijah stepped out of the shadows, his gun leveled at Adrian's head. His shirt was torn, and a new trail of blood ran down his arm, but his hand was steady. "Finish it," Adrian gasped, coughing up blood. "Be like your father, Elijah. Put a bullet in me." Elijah looked at Bonnie. He was waiting for her command. He was the weapon. She was the hand that held it. Bonnie looked at the man who had murdered her parents and tried to own her soul. "No," she said, stepping back. "Death is too easy for you, Adrian. You spent 3 years trying to turn me into a ghost. Now I'm going to make sure the world forgets you ever existed." She held up her laptop, which had survived the fray. "I didn't just drain your accounts, Adrian. I sent your entire digital ledger to the International Mafia Council, and where they don't like it when a Don steals from the shared pot. You're not going to jail. You're going to spend the rest of your very short life running from the men you used to call brothers." She turned to Elijah. "Leave him. He's already a dead man." Redemption and closure. They walked out of the warehouse as the first rays of a cold, gray dawn broke over the harbor. Behind them, they could hear the distant sound of tires screeching. The council's cleaners had arrived for Adrian. They reached the edge of the pier. The SUV was waiting, but Bonnie stopped. She turned to Elijah, the man whose father had destroyed her world and whose own blood had saved it. "I can't forget what your father did, Elijah," she said softly. Elijah looked down, his heart heavy. "I know. I'll leave. I'll go back to the shadows." "No," Bonnie said, now reaching out and taking his hand. Her fingers intertwined with his scarred ones. "The bloodline ends with us. My father is gone. Your father is gone. There's no Volkov Empire. There's no Moretti throne. There's just us." The final scene, 6 months later, a small, whitewashed villa on the coast of Greece. No marble cathedrals, no silk suits, just the sound of the Aegean Sea and the smell of salt air. Bonnie sat on the terrace, reading a book, her hair blowing in the wind. Elijah walked out, carrying 2 glasses of wine. He looked younger. The scars were still there, but the haunted look in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet, steady peace. He sat down beside her, and for the first time in 3 years, they weren't looking over their shoulders. "Any regrets?" Elijah asked. Bonnie looked at the horizon, where the blue of the sea met the blue of the sky. She smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Only one," she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I should have said I don't a long time ago." In the world of shadows, the only way to find the light is to burn the past to the ground. Bonnie and Elijah chose love over a throne. Would you have done the same? Comment freedom if you love this ending, and don't forget to subscribe for more Elite Noir Chronicles. Until the next story, stay safe in the dark.